We're going to be talking today about the business side of writing. So, writers, we wear so many different hats. We wear the hat of writer, editor, publisher, promoter. We have to be good at writing and editing and marketing ourselves. I have 3 books out and I'm working on my 4th, and I think of myself as a one-person small business. There's a lot of different things to juggle. All of these things require time, right? We need to set aside time to read, to think, to do nothing, to rest, to live our lives so we can be better at all of those different aspects of being a writer. I remember when I was in Joanne Beard's writing workshop at Sarah Lawrence, there was one student in particular who kept asking her questions about publishing. And she finally just stopped and looked at the student and said, "This isn't a publishing class. This is a writing class." And that hit me, and that distinction was so important. I felt it in my bones, and I've held on to that ever since, to separate the writing from the business of writing, from the publishing, right? Because there's the art and then there's the industry. And so to continue to set aside time for me, that's just my writing. That's taking myself seriously as an artist. But then also to put time into the business, right? If you want some of that writing to be shared with the world, doing your research, doing your homework, and figuring out the business, the industry. And so we're going to be talking about that second side today, right? The business of writing. And Jevon, you're my number one. You're on top of my list to ask questions about because you're a master here. So I'm going to ask you first to put on your agent hat with me. Think about the newer writers out listening to us today who are wondering, do I work with an agent or not? Because that's not a given one way or the other. Could you talk a little bit about the advantages to working with an agent? Are there advantages to not working with one? And then I have a couple of follow-up questions for you as an agent.
Okay, sounds good. Let's see, I think I'm having a little bit of an unstable connection here.
You froze for a second. Did you miss part of the question or did you get at?
I missed the question, I think.
Okay, I just asked you to put your agent hat on. And can you kind of talk to me if a new writer is wondering if they should get an agent or not? What are some of the advantages to working with an agent? What do you bring to the table as an agent? And are there advantages to not working with one? If someone's trying to discern that, what would you say?
Oh, that really is a good question. I think it actually plays into or kind of flows out of where you were just speaking when it comes to, separating the business of writing from the artistry and the craft of writing. And an agent really kind of helps an author do that, helps a writer do that. When you think about, having to advocate for yourself or having to negotiate a contract or having to work with a publishing team to be heard when it comes to some of the creative elements to your writing, when it comes to the editing process or marketing or cover design, having an agent as an advocate in those areas is really, really helpful. Someone who can look at a contract or look at an opportunity for a writer and say, this is how we can best leverage it so that you're seen for who you are, and appreciated for who you are, as well as, compensated and supported in lots of different ways that, sometimes when our heads are down and we're working, we're not thinking about those other needs. And an agent is there to think about all of that. So I think, especially when it comes, and then the other thing I love so much about an agent is that an agent will toot your horn if you're someone who's like, oh, I don't want to, I don't want to say too much, or I don't know if I'm a good writer. And we are a lot more closed in, writers, I guess, generally speaking about who we are. We kind of don't want to, brag, or, some of us don't. Some of us are pretty confident, but an agent has no problem at all talking about who you are, talking you up to the people who matter. And I think that that's a big plus when it comes to even writing that book proposal. Some of the elements that go into appealing to a publishing board, an agent is great at highlighting and bringing to the front where you may have thought, well, I want to tell them about how well I write, and I want to make sure that they know the mission and the message, and, or my heart towards something. But an agent is thinking much broader, or differently, I should say, so that those gaps are closed and you're made to be as appealing as you need to be to a publishing board. Now, when it comes to negotiating that by yourself, I think really, when you're saying, how do I, am I someone who is keen to, advocating for myself? Do I not mind going to bat for myself? Will I make sure that my message is articulated, or book idea or concept or whatever is articulated in a way that's appealing to a publishing board? And that you're going to go and do that. And maybe you have experience with contracts and legal things. You may feel like you can navigate that on your own. And so I think when you're talking about, I love the word that you use, which is discerning, if you're the one to do this for yourself. I think that's important. If you consider what you do maybe for yourself, if you're a writer who is bivocational, it's not what you do full time or mainly or only, if you are a person who can negotiate your salary, or who can handle, kind of like an evaluation a year, the annual evaluation, and talk about the contributions you've made. If you can think of yourself in terms of being that kind of person, you may be okay moving through the industry on your own as, both writer and sort of agenting yourself. I think that's very possible. We should be doing that actually in a lot of ways in our own lives, speaking up and out for ourselves. So I think the word that you use is really discerning what you want to be focusing on. There are some authors that I represent who are skilled at lots of different things. I mean, these are wonderful people, highly talented individuals, very capable, flexible, gifted in lots of different things, but some things they just don't want to have to worry about, And I think that that's okay. That's why there is sort of like this village concept to book publishing. It takes a whole village to get a wonderful book out. Absolutely. So that's kind of my thought toward that.
Yeah, and there is personality and skill set involved in that. Do you want to be putting your time into pitching your book out into the world? It is going to take time, and there's a lot of psychological weight there that an agent can take on for you, so you can concentrate on writing. Mm-hmm. Okay, so you think you want to work with an agent. Do you pitch first? Do you write first? Do you pitch while you're writing? What's the timing?
I think at least having a strong idea of where you want to take something is important before you start pitching, because you really won't have content or the passion it takes to even write that query letter. I think about writing and publishing as really sort of like this overflow of passion, or in any direction. It could be, anger, it could be love, it could be empathy, it could be compassion, it could be any of those things for a certain issue or person or groups of people, something that drives you forward to pursue something that's bigger than you. And I think moving through which is first is sort of intuitive. Sometimes even if I think about myself as a writer, being able to put myself in a writer's shoes, sometimes you have to start writing before you know really what it is you want to say. Sometimes it takes several pages or several chapters or whatever, lots of stream of consciousness writing, journaling or whatever, before you even really know what you want to say. And then there are other cases where it just, your idea lands in this neat package and you're like, okay, yeah, that's the hook. That's how I want to, that's the summary. You kind of just get the whole feel for it. And I think if you're at the place where you're pretty sure that this is really going to have some oh, there's a word I wanted, but I can't find it. Where it's going to have momentum is the word. When you feel like it's going to take off, there's momentum. I think that's when you can, start putting together, looking into how to write a good hook or a query letter or, your summary. Start to look at those things and put those pieces together while you're in your creative zone, and then do some crafting. And I think once you feel like, oh, this, I'm a fairly intuitive person, Ellie, and I kind of just, I'm like, oh, maybe you get little goosebumps or you feel whatever, and you're like, that's it. And I think when you're there, you start to move and look at, representation or sending out query letters, and then take each feedback or rejection as a teaching moment, because, truthfully, if you're putting yourself out there, you're going to be rejected, you hope that you're doing enough to even be rejected, because if you're not rejected, then you're really not, maybe you're not putting yourself out there as much as you could. That's just a little concept. Sometimes we try to save ourselves from rejection or save ourselves from failure so we don't attempt. But the whole idea in this game is to, yes, go for it and learn along the way.
That's right.
Yeah.
I remember that feeling of submitting for the first time and getting rejected and be like, I'm in the game.
I'm
in the game. Let's go. And it is teachable moment. There's I was gonna say there's nothing better than a good rejection, but there is.
Yeah, there is. A good yes.
Better. Let's be honest.
Yeah, a good yes is fantastic.
Really special about a good rejection where,
yes.
Oh, I'm not crazy. I'm on to something.
Yes.
But something's not being translated. And if the query isn't tight enough, that's totally different than whether the book is gonna make it or not, right? So like focusing on the query as its own thing to really work on. I pitch my book out loud to a couple of good listeners. If I can say it and see them react, that's when I know I'm ready to start writing it out. If I'm having trouble using my voice out loud to tell you what the book is, I'm not there yet. So that's one of my gut checks.
That's a good one.
If I can give you the elevator pitch and you react to it of like, oh, then I can see in your eyes I'm on to something. And then it's just a matter of the dreaded query, which is my segue. What makes a good pitch? What are you looking for? Give us some tips.
So I want to just respond back to what you were talking about, because I think we actually had a conversation similar to this. I had you come and speak to my writers group, and you were talking about how I think you said this in our workshop too at Collegeville, but you talked about how you write in motion.
Yes.
And you're a very, and I think even just the nature of how you communicate could be more verbal.
Yes.
Out loud. And some of us, like me, I'm internal. I may sort of be working through some things. If I am working through something out loud, then you're going to hear me working through it out loud because I've been sort of put on the spot. But other than that, my processing is fairly internal and nonverbal and non-moving. I need stillness and silence. So I was going to say, writers, you can sort of, Ellie, I love that Ellie said if she can't say it and get the reaction that she's thinking it would get, then she kind of knows she needs to go back to the drawing board. For writers who are more internal and maybe introverted in their processing, I would say do some testing out. I love social media because it allows you to be your introverted self, and you can post something on Facebook. You could do a blog post, maybe, if you have a newsletter or something, you can kind of share the beginnings of ideas, and don't necessarily say, well, I'm sharing the beginning of my book idea. You could actually sort of speak to whatever it is you're writing in a short post and see what kind of responses you get as a result of that writing. And you'll kind of begin to understand, oh, this is something that people would really, really gravitate to and really appreciate. So you had just asked about what do I look for in a good pitch? I think again, I'm an intuitive person, and there's some things that just flow together. But I really appreciate when someone's own story generates their need to write. So if they had been, and so that I think that's even why I appreciate memoirs, and I appreciate even the self-help style book that results out of someone's own lived experience, helping us navigate through something you've been through. I think there's such a strong connection there. And maybe there's some revelatory elements that are unique, that you're not going to just get from anybody. It's unique. It's something that we can learn from. And so I look for, a person being able to say exactly what that is and to land on who their audience is. Sometimes people are sort of writing around the concept or around the audience, or not really knowing the right words that penetrate and that hit. So something that actually feels crafted and feels aimed and targeted is really important to me, because then I know there's um, there's not necessarily that process that I have to go through with the author to get them there. However, go ahead.
No, go ahead, keep going.
There has been times where the concept for me was so like, oh, and the author is still trying to articulate it, but I'm like, oh, that's it. And I can immediately connect with them. So I want to say too that every agent is different. And agents have their own experience and professional background that informs how they agent. Mine is content development and editorial. So there's going to be a lot of that plays into how I read a query. And so I love queries that have really strong personal connection with how someone can live and improve their lives, improve their perspective on life. And and that could be from a kid's book, it could be fiction, it could be any of those things, something that sort of brings us into a new understanding, or place of broadened perspective regarding something that maybe we hadn't considered or experienced before.
And I think it can be a mistake of trying a writer feeling pressure to write to everyone. Then in some ways you're writing to no one.
Absolutely.
Right. And so a query is not trying to do everything all at once. It's saying, this is what I'm trying to do. This is the bookshelf you'll find my book on. Here are the people who are going to pick it up and read it. And the writing that I love of my own is the writing I did for myself. Like, I wish this existed. It doesn't exist, so I'm going to write it. So it's for me first and foremost, but then I also know who the intended audience is and kind of have a hyper focus on serving that person.
Yeah.
And that's what gets it its voice.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is not writing to everybody and trying to please everyone. Which
and I think part of that is really having an understanding of yourself, so that what do you need, what would you look for in a similar circumstance, what did you hope for, what did you wish you had? If you're kind of using your experience as a jumping off point, answering some of those questions in the form of content development, and then getting your hook to really communicate what that is, and getting the summary to say what that is. And the other thing that's great for me in a query is motivation. Why did I feel like this was important for me to write? And again, sometimes I'm working through this. This could be a fault of mine, but seeing diamonds in the rough for me is not hard. And so, outside of someone just pitching or querying outside of a category I don't represent, there's a lot of times I'm able to see into something a little bit beyond it being perfect,
Yeah. Well, sometimes when you're outside of the person's head, you can be like, this is what you're trying to say. Which is what makes you so great as an agent and an editor. I do want to talk a little bit about, you are so passionate and bring your skills in such an important way to amplify the voices of our BIPOC Christian writers. And you said previously, it takes a village to bring a book into the world. Can you just talk a little bit about some of your different roles in terms of your writing group, agent, editor, book coach? What are you doing in the world, and how is the publishing world becoming better as we speak, because we're finally starting to prioritize writers of color?
Yeah. The Lee and Low survey that launched, I think, was it 2015 or so, somewhere around there. Was it earlier? Oh, I don't remember. But that was the starting point of us seeing that and I don't, us as in the industry, seeing how things were so skewed. There was, if it, those of you who are participating here have checked out the publishing so white, I think publishing is so white hashtag on Twitter, a lot of awareness sort of jumped off as a result of counting and actually showing hard numbers. And then, among the writer community, writers being a lot more transparent about offers and, their relationship to their publisher and things like that, sort of, pulling back the sheets, I guess, on, kind of what's happening behind the scene. And so, as a result of that, publishing is trying to make some changes very, very slowly, very slowly. This is also not the first time that this kind of conversation has risen to the surface. The hope is that there's more sustained change, because in previous times, there were rushes to start imprints for writers of color, rushes to hire editors of color, and so forth. And many of those things have since ceased, they've gone away. And so now the question is, this is all great, everybody's getting, aware and excited, but what are we gonna do to make this sustainable, because these stories and these people, the readers, they need this, and they're not going away. The world is becoming a lot more diverse. Our globe is sort of shrinking as a result of our global connections are becoming tighter and closer because of things like what we're doing right now. And I think even the interesting thing about this last 12 months with the pandemic, we're sort of having to face that there's lots of ways that we can communicate, and that also means that our audience is, also becoming global. So, as far as what publishers can do would be to create environments that are not only diverse, where it looks like everyone is diverse, but also doing some training and centering and exercises or practices that are inclusive and that provide equity to people who are coming in from the margins. There should not, when you're talking about decision makers, the decision makers should be of color. It should not be that the decision makers are all, kind of like on the assembly line, they're, associate editor, assistant editor, or whatever, but they're, publisher and editorial director and marketing director and sales director. And really those who come from communities that speak that language and understand how to reach those audiences, and then valuing the input that they give, actually allowing their input to cause and influence decisions for the writers of color. I think that's part of the sustainability of it. And so, that speaks to company culture and everything else. So this is just, sort of like this symbiotic things that should be happening simultaneously while, there's agents of color. I was informed a couple of years ago that at the time, and we don't, that we could see at the time I became or established saying that I was an agent. I was probably one of the only agents of color who focused on Christian publishing, or who mainly represent Christian authors. That's something that needs to change. There are more now who are joining and doing, but that's part of it too. And so I do have a writers group, Numa Writers, that does, that supports diverse authors, and we just love it. We've just had authors from around the world, like literally Africa, Kenya, trying to think of a couple other places, Ghana and Germany and Canada and several other places. That's just been part of what we're doing, and I just absolutely love it. And I think that's one way to even just begin the cultivation of authors of color. So creating safe spaces, even among writers groups and writers conferences, where diverse authors and writers of color feel like they can be present and bring their stories and themselves fully into that space. And then, when it comes to content development, having editors of color and writing coaches of color and all of that. So I do participate in a lot of the helping authors, doing the coaching and things like that to help authors of color learn how to navigate the industry with their ideas. Take your ideas with you as you go, and being able to articulate them in a way that the industry can understand. And then advocating for yourself and persuading the need for the support that you need from them. Not only I'm not going to make my idea necessarily appeal to you, but I need you to understand the audience that I'm bringing with me, or that would be appealing to, or that would engage with my message. You need to also provide that support and that team that will come around me and help me in that. So it's like this two-way street, obviously, and being a person who, a woman of color, African-American woman who can help authors do that, has been a great joy. It's been challenging. But it's been something that I feel like I'm uniquely positioned to do at this time. And I'm hoping and praying for more professionals of color to rise to that.
I love that. Maybe a couple are here today.
Yes.
Okay, I have like 18 more questions for you, but I also want to let the folks who are here listening in be able to ask questions. So let's flip the tables, and then we'll do questions at the end. Is that okay, Jevon?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay. What do you got for me?
So I wanted to talk with you about the projects that you've done. I was so excited when you came and talked to our group. You were in the middle, were you at the end of writing 12 Tiny Things?
Yeah, I
was. And I had been following along on Twitter. Everyone, please, I just love Ellie's hashtag 12 Tiny Things. Just really, really special, sweet moments of consideration, of holding space for different things in your life, noticings, and I just really appreciate it so much. So you've been writing forever and so beautifully, and your first book was with Chalice Press. And can you talk to me? You didn't have an agent or anything like that, but yeah, tell me about what that experience was like for you.
Yeah, I was a baby. I was it's a spiritual memoir about a year I did a volunteer program in Uruguay, and kind of that thinking that I could do something effective and then realizing there's nothing that I could do. And I just had to be in a company, and I learned a whole lot.
Was that Play Like a Girl?
This was How Coffee Saved My Life.
Okay.
Yeah, so this was my very first one. And it started by writing. I had to write newsletters home while I was in Uruguay, and folks loved them and started forwarding them, and I started getting responses from strangers. I'm like, oh, this is interesting to people, And so I ended up taking it really seriously, and it turned into a memoir. I was 25 at the time, knew nothing about the industry, had never taken a writing class, right? I just fell into this by accident. So I researched, Googled everything, sent proposals to, I think, 8 different Christian presses. And one of them said yes. I look back and I still do not know how this happened. It's a horrible story to tell because that's not how it goes. It's not how it went with my other 2 books. But I think they took a chance on a young writer. One of the reasons that I found an agent was because agents can get your pitch into publishing houses that will only accept proposals from agents, not directly from writers.
Yeah.
And when I talk about the different hats of the writing, I love writing.
Yeah.
Pitching sucks the soul out of my body.
We don't want the soul sucked out of your body, Ellie. Yeah.
Like the amount of yoga that I need to do to get through pitch season, it's so heavy. It's so psychologically rigorous. It's the ghosting, like just the like no response is like,
it's tough.
So I separate I separate the art and the business, like I'm talking the good talk, it's hard, right? And so I kind of wanted my agent to be on the front lines for me, taking the blows so that I can focus on the work, right?
Yeah.
And that helped. I like that. I do want to talk a little bit about my 3rd book project in terms of the business of writing. So this is 12 Tiny Things. 12 Tiny Things I published with Broadleaf Books, which is not overtly Christian. They're under 1517 media, which is, but Broadleaf's mission is expanding the mind, nourishing the soul, cultivating the common good. So it's in the Christian world, but it's not all like explicitly Christian books. And that's where 12 Tiny Things landed for me. My co-author and I, she's a wellness coach. We decided to extract the explicit Jesus and God language, even though it's a faith book for me through and through. It's a book about my micro spiritual practice. We wanted it accessible, especially to young adults who are getting tripped up on the semantics of Christianity, so that they could get in and do the practice as well. But because it was a Christian book for me, what I did was created a 12-week Bible study that goes along with the book. So if you go to 12 Tiny Things website, there's even a button like for church resources that you can click that has meditations and it has a Bible study, so that I wanted it to be used in the Christian world. And I do think that this is a relevant part of this business of books conversation, is that even if you have an agent and even if you have a PR person at your press who's fantastic, you have to sell your own book, like that is on you. And I found it so much easier with 12 Tiny Things to make it bigger than the book. It's COVID, pastors are working their tails off. For me to be able to hand them a 12-week study guide and say, here, just do this. It made it so much easier for me to promote the book. And it's doing really well in Christian circles, even without God and Jesus language in there, because they have that translated into that context, if that makes sense. So we have a tab for teachers, we have a tab for churches. And so I really did enjoy kind of doing these resources on the side to make the book more usable. And so I think that's just a call out to writers who are listening, that it doesn't have to end just at the book, that if you're writing a book that you want people to use, picture your ideal table of people holding your book. What are they doing with it? And can you make that easier for them so that it's easy? It's an easier yes. Let's just say.
And I feel like what you're saying here is so critical, because that's the part that fuels everything. Who are you writing to?
Totally.
And because you really have to kind of identify, because that's what, it provides that empathy and how can I serve them, or what would they need? It really kind of puts the reader at the front of mind, and then it causes you to build out whatever it is that needs to be built out to give them whatever they need. And in turn, you don't actually feel like you're marketing. You know what I mean? It's like, you need this. Let me, okay. And then I have this, and then and I feel like that's such, when you're working from that level of an overflow, like what you're talking about, it sounds like it's different than you writing how coffee saved my life at 25. You know what I mean? The growth, the journey. Yeah.
Well, and you're right, because I like with that, I now I can look back and I know exactly who it was for. And when you talk about not writing to everyone, like I still get a couple notes a year from people who I wrote it specifically for, thanking me, which is so sweet.
Yeah.
I eventually found my people, but with a spiritual memoir, it just was like, here, do you want to read my story? And it's so hard. Now with 12 Tiny Things, it's a trick that I play where it's not marketing me. It's creating an experience for people that were so hungry to come around a table and have rich connection points. A book that you can smack in the middle of the table is a great thing for people to come around. And you can make that easier by fleshing out some resources that go along with the book. And so it is hard to promote yourself, but it's easier to promote ideas. And if you, going back to your query letter, if you believe in the ideas of your book, who do you want to be talking to about those ideas? Well, create that table, right? Create resources for that table.
And I say, you know, the table of your own creation where you're working on these things, you may have to sit with your message and idea and, you know, that passion that you feel burning. You may have to sit with that for some time for some of these things to surface. All of a sudden you're seeing the person, you're feeling with them, you know, and you're writing your ideas, you're sharing will sort of really kind of match that intensity. And that's when I'm telling you, all the little, you know, the names that we give those sections of the proposal, your hook and your reader benefits and summaries and all of these things, chapter outlines and all that. Those will be so focused on that person that it'll just be so clear that you really know, you understand and connect with them even before they receive the book.
Yeah, I like name these people. Like I name my ideal readers and put them on index cards and know who they are. And then I think the other word of hope I just want to give writers is with How Coffee Saved My Life, it sold its most copies 5 years in. You know, and so sometimes like we put a lot of pressure on launch season, but you can get smarter as you go. And so just as rejection feedback is information, so is positive feedback. As the book was going and I was seeing who was enjoying it, you can start to build out and listen to who is liking it and why, and then get the book into the hands of similar people and kind of flow with where the energy goes. I'm going to tackle the business of writing because I love when a book takes on a life of its own out in the world. It always surprises you and does things you didn't expect. To be paying attention to the life that your little book takes on can help grow that business side of things. If you're paying attention and not, you know, you're going to throw a lot of mud at walls that don't stick, but following the tread that it's already making and seeing where it leads you is always just so fun.
That's so good.
Okay, I want folks to be able to ask us questions. Can we bring Stina up? Because I know there's a bunch for you, Jevon. Hi, Stina.
Hi guys, this is a great conversation. And yes, I'm going to funnel you all some questions from our Q&A and also from Facebook Live. So here's a question for Jevon. When you're considering whom to represent, what marketing numbers are you looking for, such as numbers of people on a writer's email list, number of blog followers, social media platforms?
Yeah, you know, that's a little interesting because, you know, sometimes it's not just about hard numbers. Sometimes it really is about the message and how the author is positioned within that message. So what I do like to see is that an author does sort of have a community that's looking forward to reading from them, and the engagement of that community. So, you know, I do like to, you know, I think it's great to have you know, I don't like to give numbers. I'll just say that because it can really range. Like if you've ever noticed, the person who asked this question, if you've ever noticed going to look at some authors who recently got signed or recently got a publishing deal, and you're looking at their pages and like, well, they don't have, you know, a lot of numbers, but there's something about their message that really is going to draw people in or really connect with their audience. So I would say, if you do want to think about numbers, is I really do like to see an author who has an engaging website, that they look like they have a message that they're excited about, something that they're, or a message or cause that really means something to them. And then that their social media reflects that. I like to see synergy and connection, cohesion. I think that's really important. It doesn't, I will say that I appreciate when an author has a couple thousand or more on their email list. And that's mainly because, social media can sort of be here or there. But knowing that you have a community that's waiting to hear from you, they opted in, and of course, when people follow you, they sort of opt in. But then sometimes we may or may not see each other's posts, or we may forget that we followed somebody. But the email list is something that really shows to me that you really have some strong engagement. So I would encourage the authors, writers who are aspiring to really work on building your community, providing those, low-hanging fruit type resources to really bring them in and serve them.
Well, and Jevon, that goes back to your point about beta testing, that to be throwing out some of the ideas in the book, in your newsletter, see how people are responding to it. They will rebuy the book. It's not like they're not going to buy the book because they heard it in your
right. Mm-hmm.
Right. This is trying to get folks who are interested in this theme,
mm-hmm.
as you're refining your voice around the book idea. So it'll work in two ways.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that.
Okay, another question. How has Jevon's experience publishing as a woman of color been different from Ellie's?
Oh. I don't know. We've actually never, ever talked about that.
Well, Collegeville should probably have us back to have that conversation.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Oh, I do want to say I did author a book. And I'm saying that because I've yet to call myself an author, but I was just thinking about, I feel like it's important while I'm, we're talking about audience, serving people, and audience and things like that, really connecting. And I felt like it was important that I went through the process myself. And I've been a writer for a long time, but I just wanted to share that I have gone through the process of authoring. And so I think maybe that conversation would be great to have at another time.
And I will say my whiteness has been a character in a couple of my books. So that for sure plays a role. Yeah, that's fascinating. I would love to be. Industry is so difficult that I had a ton of barriers. It took me a long time to find an agent, and it took my agent a long time to find press. And yet, if you look at the numbers, the system is set up for me to succeed, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And I think, just because I was sort of on the other side of things as an editor, I could probably talk about what that looked like, but I think we'd have to just kind of compare or contrast, just being on different sides of the experience. I did publish my own books, so that could be one other difference. I did not actually look for publishing because I wanted to, I felt like I could do it myself, truthfully. I'll just do it myself. I didn't want to wait for anybody or, well, Jevon, what do you think? Let me just do it real quick and, So
I love talking to writers about whether you self-publish or go with a press house. There are really strong pros and cons on both sides. It's not clear. It's not clear anymore if one is better than the other. You just need to know what you're doing. Yeah. And if you want it fast.
Yeah. And I just happen, that's something that I have from being in publishing. Yeah. I mean, I know cover designers. I have great editor friends. I know kind of what it looks like to put together a product that people can use. And so it just kind of worked out that way. And I, so that'd be interesting to talk about too, self-publishing versus traditional publishing.
Right, totally.
Well, sort of related to that, someone is asking if it's expensive to have an agent.
No. Well, I mean, it depends on what you're spending, emotional expense or no, I don't know. There's so much that we could spend. Agents don't, should not be charging for their services. Let's just say that up front. There is a commission that they get based on your advance and royalties. So agents work very hard on the front end when it comes to helping you get your proposal together, making sure your book concept itself is tight. They may even be ones who read your manuscript with you. They may, check up on you. And there's lots of things that an agent could do depending on their background. And they do not charge for that per se. There can be other expenses when it comes to getting ready to be published. And that could be things like getting your book proposal edited or getting your, first draft edited or something like that. Some of those things that you may want to do just to make sure that you're prepared for the publisher. The agent may assist you in getting that kind of work done, and that's where some additional costs could be. The other thing, sometimes agents will, the author may need the agent to travel, things like that. There could be some expenses there. There could also be some expenses related to book promotion, mail outs and things, but a lot of times we're not doing a lot of that because we could email it to an influencer list or something like that, or just things like that. Ellie, I don't know if you want to speak into anything that you've noticed in the area.
Yeah, I don't think of it as an expense. My agent gets my royalty checks and my advance checks from the press. She takes a 15% cut and sends me the rest. So in my mind, like, that percentage is worth the time that I did not have to deal with the industry. And
Right.
it was kind of a first stamp of approval going out into the world. And and the theory is that she can get my proposal in bigger doors that I wouldn't have been able to get in myself. And so that cut then works itself out.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I love how you say where you didn't. I think it's so important. We're talking about the business of publishing. Ellie is just like, I didn't have to deal with publishing.
I built a wall with my hand.
Right? You sure did. This is a whole embodied moment here.
I am protecting my soul from the industry because other people have skills there that I do not.
Yeah. And I think that's so valuable to know. I think that's a very valuable thing to know.
Another question from Facebook Live. Someone's asking, Jevon, what are you looking for in picture books?
Oh, so cute, empowering stories. They can feature characters from your own background. Like if you have a certain cultural background, definitely I love those. I think we need more and more stories like that. They don't necessarily, they can sort of center an activity within a family, or and they don't necessarily have to be about like a cultural element, but that's also very, very valuable, helping us have a window inside a cultural world that may be different from our own. I love that. And then, definitely providing that opportunity for kids of color to see themselves in books. I love that. And so, the range there is wonderful. I also appreciate books that have maybe character building and moral, sometimes spiritual influences, definitely from a Christian standpoint for me, if I'm going to be pitching to Christian publishers. But they don't have to be overtly Christian. No, they don't have to be, but I do appreciate those. And even if they're not cultural, I do think that they need to have some, takeaways for the kids. What are they learning? How are they, learning how to see differences and appreciate others in their world, sharing, friendship, kindness, a fun day out doing something else or other, I think those are great.
Great. Okay, I think this question is in reference to something you said, Ellie. It says, what does write in motion mean?
Ah,
Oh,
okay, let's go.
I'm gonna
Let's go.
snap.
All right. Um,
You
so I don't know if you can tell, but I'm a kinesthetic learner. That's my highest intelligence, which means my body is smart. I was a college athlete, but it also means I do my best thinking when my body is moving. So for example, in a writing day, I will do most of my writing in my head while I'm doing other things. And I only sit down at the computer to kind of document what I already have crafted in my head. And if I'm doing a long writing day, for sure, there's like a 5 mile run in there. If I'm feeling stuck with my writing, I will break with the problem in my head and run. I write in the shower. And so that's what writing in motion means. I think when I hear some people talking about writer's block, what I'm hearing them do is sit down and look at a blank screen and start sweating. And I just don't do that. I skip it. I don't sit down until I already have the thing going, and then the momentum picks me up. Before I get up off of the computer, I know what my next thing is, so that the back of my head is always working on it. You know, I get up from the middle of sleep and write things down. Like I'm playing with my kids, and I have a whole wall in my office that's painted whiteboard, you know, and I'll just run in and write something on the whiteboard or type it quick on my phone or do my voice recorder. So, you know, my whole life is writing. If I'm chopping vegetables, I'm writing. I don't have to like set it aside to this one, and this has helped me having little kids. That little chunk of time just never presents itself, right?
Right.
So that's how my body and my mind is wired, is that I find flow while my body is moving. Not everybody is like that. The Jevon says she needs quiet, right? And I have a friend who talks about writing in the closet. You know, like dark and quiet, and nobody gets to come in or talk to you, and it's very internal. So knowing your intelligence type and knowing the time of day, the activities when you feel the most creative, but I do think a flow is how both of us would refer to that, of the not stuckness, then embracing that in your life, where kind of writing is just about the posturing that you bring to everything. It's not a chunk of time during your day.
Right, that's good.
That's great, thank you. One last question. Someone is asking about the nuances of Christian publishing. I think this might have been in reference to something earlier you guys were speaking about. So the question is, what are the nuances of Christian publishing? I think, yeah, does that ring a bell from earlier?
I guess I wonder if the person, I think we'd probably like some clarification, maybe, I don't know.
Yeah.
You have some thoughts about it?
Like if we're trying to break into the Christian publishing world versus the publishing world at large, are there any red flags? Are there any considerations? Is what needs to be different about the pitch?
Yeah, so that, I think that's the interesting thing about Christian publishing, is that from one publisher to the next, that is sort of indeterminate. I know that doesn't sound great, but that's why it's also good to have an agent who would have said, like, I represent authors who write a spectrum. They, like you were, and even what Ellie was saying, your first book was explicitly Christian. Yeah. You know, through your journey, you know, you came down here to 12 Tiny Things, and you wouldn't say that that's explicitly Christian. But you know, so there are publishers who publish along that spectrum as well. And I think just kind of knowing or having access to an agent who knows which place to put you, you know, maybe if you're thinking of one publisher that is, you know, fairly academic or theologically based, and they want to know that you're going to, you know, have the scriptures quoted every so far, you know, so often. They want to know if you have a certain degree and, you know, all of that, then that's who you would write for. If you, you know, or aim your proposal at, you would not pitch something like that to someone who, another publisher that's more, you know, interested in, nourishing life, like Broadleaf says, or is interested in, helping people, just kind of maybe raise questions about God and not necessarily focusing on any kind of denomination or anything. So there's quite a few. There's a lot of nuances actually to Christian publishing. That I think it really takes some navigating and some investigation research to know.
Well, and I think so people sometimes overthink this. Like one of my tricks is just realizing who's publishing the books I love. Like what shelf of the bookstore is your book going to be on? Who's publishing the stuff that would be next to your books? Like this is just things you need to know. So like every book you read the acknowledgments, see if the person has an agent, look at the press. If there's a press that shows up a bunch of times on your bookshelf, look up their website and see what, because you're trying to find the people who are publishing, who are already looking to publish what you're going to write.
Yeah.
Right? And it can be as unscientific as studying your bookshelf and reading through the acknowledgments, reading through the back cover, doing a little website, little social media scrolling.
Yeah, that's really, really great starting point. Excellent.
Well, everyone, it's already past 1 o'clock, and I just want to say thank you so much, Jevon and Ellie. That just like flew by. Your expertise and energy and insight was just so enriching, and we're just so grateful that you guys were able to come and talk to us. And also thanks to everybody who's watching on Facebook Live or here in this webinar. We also want to invite you to join us for future Collegeville Connections events. Our next event is actually going to be on Wednesday, June 2nd, so in a month from now. It's the same time from noon to 1 o'clock Central Time, and you'll have the opportunity to hear from our writing workshop alumna, Lydia Wiley-Kellerman. She's the editor of G's Magazine, and she's going to be in conversation with her father, Bill, about how to raise kids to love and seek justice. They're going to be discussing her new book titled The Sandbox Revolution, Raising Kids for a Just World. So check that out on the Collegeville Institute website and register, and we hope to see you then. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and we hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.